be true to yourself. Be true to who you are. Think back of your why. Why did you start the company? What is your mission? What are your values? And be true to it. So many times you see people starting a company and it's, X widget. And next thing you know, they're selling N95 masks. For what? To make $10,000 or $20,000 off the sign, just off a sale. And just know who you are, know what you want to be, and stay true to it. It might be very tempting to follow the crowd, and it might be very tempting to have someone promote your product, but if it's not someone that you personally align with, or if you don't have shared visions, and at what cost. And I think as long as you can stay true to yourself, go back to your why, I think you can do it. I think you can overcome it.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
Boom. Awesome. Thank you so much for letting me interview you, Nargis.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy our conversations.
Yes, that was great catching up. I could have talked to you for hours there before we started going live there, but I wanted everyone else to get the benefit of all your superstarness that you have done with your life. So Nargis, share a little bit of your story with us. Let's go back as early as you're comfortable with, and then we'll jump into the entrepreneurship stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll start back when my mom was pregnant with me. 1986, we were in Afghanistan, and my mom was pregnant with me and had 5 other young children. And my father at the time had a visa to come to the United States, and his life was in danger, so he had to escape and evade the Soviet Union at the time. So he went to the United States, leaving my mom pregnant with me and 5 little kids. And so fast forward a few months, I was born in Pakistan at a refugee camp. And it was not easy on my mom with all the stress. It almost took her life giving birth to me. And once she was healthy enough to travel, we came to the United States. My father wanted nothing more than to give his kids the American dream. And just so you kind of understand, there were 4 girls and 2 boys. And so he was very protective of the girls. So we landed in New York, Queens. Actually, it was a little suburb of New York, Queens, so Far Rockaway. And again, this was in 1986. And so it wasn't exactly the safest place to be at the time. And so, according to my mom, my dad said we left one war-torn country from Afghanistan and we moved right into another, which was Queens, New York in 1986. Drive-by shootings were an occurrence, violence, drugs. I mean, you name it. It was awful. My mom, I think, was really questioning the American dream. She's like, really? This is America. My father knew people of small town, rural Pipestone, Minnesota. Population 4,500. So he uprooted us once again and just landed in this town. And it was pretty amazing. My high school was in the middle of a cornfield. And so, my father used to always tell me there are 2 important things to be successful in life. And he was number 1, education. And number 2, hard work. And he wasn't just preaching it, he lived by those words. And I mean, we all did. I also vividly remember when I was very young, I was about 4 or 5 years old, he would just give me kind of his life lessons of the day. And one of those days it was, Nargis, never make up excuses. He's like, and at the time I didn't fully comprehend what he was talking about. But he was just saying you can be whatever you want, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, you name it. He just said, don't make excuses. And those words really just more recently than ever before have really resonated with me. Again, I didn't fully appreciate or comprehend what he was telling me. So fast forward, a couple of years, unfortunately, he passed away in a car accident. He never really got to see the American dream that he provided for our family. It didn't come easy. So my mom, 6 kids, all under the age of 18, barely spoke any English. And all of a sudden she found herself where she needed to work. And so, being from the cultural background and as an Afghan woman, she picked up every odd and end job, whether it's homemaking, sewing, cooking, cleaning, you name it, she did it all. And I think anybody else in that situation would have just either thrown up their hands and quit, but my mom instead, she dug in her heels and just kept on pushing forward. And it was, our family is so close together because we literally did everything that we could to just help each other. Even myself, at the age of 6, I did as much as I could to contribute. And, that was washing dishes, cooking, whatever it was that I could contribute. My first job was when I was 8 years old. So I was tall enough. I lied about my job or about my age, and I was babysitting other 8-year-olds. But it was just that I had that maturity. I had the height. Nobody was the wiser. And so essentially I've had a job ever since I was 8 years old. And I'm telling you, like odd and end jobs, just everything from a dishwasher, a waitress. I worked at a hardware store. So I know way too much about tools than I ever cared to. You name it. I probably did. Once I turned 18, I was even a bartender in the state of South Dakota because you can serve alcohol in the state of South Dakota. And so I worked at a golf course. It's just, I gained a lot of life experiences from just working. And so I took my father's words to heart, and his number one thing was get an education. So I studied, I was a 4.0 student. I just, but I was also doing it because I knew that was the only way I could get to college. I had to have good grades. I was blessed enough to be athletically inclined, and I ended up taking my high school women's basketball team to the state champion. And it was our first time in over 2 decades. By the way, we lost by 1 point at the buzzer. So still a little fresh, even though that was back my senior year. That's when West Point recognized me, and I got recruited to play basketball for West Point. And I'm going to backtrack there a little bit because I'm not completely honest. I actually enlisted in the Army National Guard when I was 17 years old. There I was on my 17th birthday. The recruiter is in my house, and I wanted to serve our country. I've always had a passion to serve our country. I've been very grateful for what America has given me and my family and the opportunities, and I've always wanted to pay it forward. And so there I was signing the contract, and I became Private Kabiri at the age of 17, my junior year of high school. And I remember, so because I was still a minor, my mom had to sign the contract. And my mom, just sees this guy in uniform. She doesn't know what's going on. And I'm like, Mom, sign the contract. She goes, what is this for? I'm like, oh, I'm just getting a college scholarship, which is, partially true. And sure enough, she just signed, and that was it. And so in a way, I'm very fortunate that West Point got wind of me, and I was recruited to play basketball. And I still had to get my congressional nomination, and I was also in the National Guard, so I got my commander's letter, and I got recruited. So I got in all 3 ways. And so West Point was amazing. It definitely had its trials and tribulations. It was new to me. Everything was so brand new. I didn't come from a family that was prior military. I think I definitely got along with the order, the obedience aspect of it. That was very much in line with the way that I grew up. The Army values very much resonated with me. So it was just it was easy to transition over. And as crazy as it sounds, West Point was kind of a break for me. So for the first time ever, all I had to do was study and play basketball. I didn't have to work. I didn't have to have all the side hustles. I didn't have to, and oh, by the way, I got paid to do it. You know, now granted, it was what, $200 a month, but it was still something. And so I was so grateful for that opportunity. Fast forward 2010. So I was the only woman to go field artillery in 2010 from the West Point class. It was pretty interesting. Up until then, I thought I was going to go military intelligence. I kind of toyed around with some other things. So here I was as a native Dari speaker. I majored in Arabic, and I thought I was going to be like the next, 007. I don't know. I thought I was going to do all that stuff. Well, sure enough, I was doing CrossFit in the mornings with a bunch of people in a group and officers and cadets. And one of the guys just kind of, asked me, he's like, Nargis, what are you going to do for branch? And I was like, well, I'm definitely leaning towards MI, but, I didn't know anything else at the time. He goes, why don't you come on over to my office and we'll talk. So he gives me his office number. I go there the next day, and next thing I know, I'm standing right in front of the field artillery branch rep's office. And just again, to show you how naive I was like, oh, I didn't think women could go artillery at the time. I was so oblivious to all of it. Long story short, I went artillery. I never looked back. It was the best decision I made. I've had a wonderful career, and it's funny, like my dad said, the harder you work, the more success you gain, and don't make up excuses. And so the first example of that was in 2012, I became the Army's guinea pig for women in combat arms. So at the time I was in a rocket unit because women could do think long range weapon systems. And so they tested it by, I became the first female cannon platoon leader. And at the time it was the world's only airborne 777 unit. So if your audience is not military, I apologize. That's a lot to take in, but basically the 777 is a 155 millimeter howitzer, and the planning range for that for firing is about 12,000 meters or kilometers. And so you're kind of in the fight, right? It's not our smallest weapon piece, but it's that middle range. So and I obviously was successful, and so I just again, I didn't use my gender as an excuse. I knew at the time the biggest argument at the time was the ability of women to handle it physically. And so guess what I did? I just spent extra hours in the gym. I made sure I was ready. I made sure I was not a liability to the unit. Because at the end of the day, the soldiers don't care who you are. They want a leader that they can depend on and rely on, regardless of race, gender, religion, whatever. They just need to know that you're going to be there for them in the time of combat. And so I really took that to heart, and I wanted to be the best leader for them. So I promise I'm getting to my entrepreneur story here eventually. So this I had a lot of other firsts under my belt, and again, every time I was very appreciative of that, the fact that the artillery community chose me to lead the way, to kind of trailblaze, and all the while I've always wanted to pay it forward. So I did the best that I could. I tried to mentor as many people as I could along the way, and I couldn't have done it without the amazing mentors, officers and NCOs alike. So I'm not going to sit here and say it was just one team, one fight. No, it wasn't me as an individual. Yes, it was a team. It was a collective team. And so I had a lot of supporters. So now fast forward to 2015. And by now I'm feeling very confident in my career. I think I have everything figured out. Everything should be smooth sailing right before command. Well, then life threw a curveball at me. We had our first son. And just to kind of paint the picture there, my husband got called up on GRF, which is the Global Response Force. And he got called up for that about a month before I gave birth. And the irony was I actually went into the full 40 weeks versus the 36 weeks. So I had to get induced, so maybe anyways. So he just barely missed the birth, but he did miss the birth. And so, we proceeded to live apart for that next year while he was deployed. I was a first-time mom. We had just moved to, so he was still at Fort Bragg. So I moved to Fort Stewart. It's about a 5-hour commute. Again, thinking, well, if I go into labor, he could just drive down and meet me at the hospital. Obviously, Iraq wasn't a drive that he could make at the time. So yeah, Fort Stewart, brand new duty station, brand new house. We bought the house. They were building a community, and I was the first one out of the community of 30 homes. So once again, as a 9-month pregnant lady surrounded by a bunch of construction workers, it was just, in hindsight, I was like, maybe that wasn't the safest thing, but it was fine. And I was also in a demanding job. So I was the assistant operations officer for a brigade level. So I was the AS3 for Davarti. It was extremely demanding. I was working 12 to 14 hours a day. And the only way that I knew how to stay close to my newborn son for me was through breast milk. I made the decision I was going to breastfeed. And at the time, according to the CDC regulations, they, you should, I hate the word should, but they recommended to breastfeed for 12 months. And I thought, well, I could do this. And so I set out a goal and I said 12 months, how hard could that be? Well, needless to say, I failed. And I don't take failure very lightly. And I think the worst part about that was the failure was everything external to me. I had no control of the, the times that I could pump, the places I could pump. They just didn't have the rules and regulations. And again, it wasn't ill intent. And for me, I try to educate up front as much as I could, and I definitely advocated for myself, but you don't know what you don't know. And little did I know, I didn't know anything about nursing, pumping, breastfeeding. I was learning as I went. And so again, I was in an all male unit, and people tried to help me. They're like, hey, I'm about to go in this meeting for 30 minutes. Feel free to use my office. And, but I couldn't rely on other people's schedule. As if any of you guys have experienced or may know someone who was breastfeeding, when your body needs to do it, like to lactate, your body needs to do it. Needless to say, I ended up contracting mastitis, not once, but twice. And with the second one, I was done. I was told by the doctors I could no longer breastfeed. And every time, so just in case you guys haven't heard of mastitis, it's a condition where, if in a third world country or left untreated, it can actually lead to death. It's pretty serious, but we are very blessed to be in America. We have modern medicine. And so that modern medicine is antibiotics. So once you're on antibiotics, you can't breastfeed. You have to pump and dump. So the first time that happened to me, luckily I had enough of a supply. So I could just, use the supply that I had while I had to pump and dump for the 5 days I was on the antibiotics. The second time, it got so engorged. I just started, I'm not kidding, again, just thinking about it, I'll never forget the day. I got up from my desk. It was after, or I got up from the desk. We were doing a conference meeting, and all of a sudden I just leaned over and I just started throwing up. Like I had no idea what was wrong with me. I knew I missed my pumping time, but I thought I'll get it after the meeting. Well, next thing I know, I had to get rushed to the ER. And that's when they said, no more. So that was it was traumatic. It was so traumatic. It was, talk about emotions and feelings. Here I am, type A. I've always learned that as long as you work hard, you can achieve any goal, you can accomplish anything. It's all about work ethic. But then now it was this whole new realm of, well, what do you do when your failures are external? They are factors that are not within your sphere of influence. Stephen Covey's book, by the way. So, he talks about what can you control in your sphere of influence and what's outside of that. And so again, I did the best to control what I could, and yet I still failed at something. So now fast forward to my second son. By now I came right off maternity leave and I went right into command. And so you would think, well, and I did think, I was like, well, this should be easy. I'm in command. I have my own office. That office has a door and that door has a lock. Easy, right? Well, the thing about field artillery is that we're in the field quite a bit. And at the time when I took command, we were actually slated to deploy. So we were doing a lot of gunnery tables, a lot of certifications, and in and out of the field nonstop. And the first time I went to the field, I thought I had everything squared away. I thought I was ready. But if you can just picture this in the middle of Fort Stewart, Georgia in the summer, I mean, forget the field, those are the swamps. It's already 100+ degrees with the heat index. I'm sitting in the back of my Humvee, pulling the tarp down, almost suffocating. And, you know, my little battery operated fan just wasn't cutting it. But I just had this unhealthy amount of paranoia that a male subordinate would walk up on me and see me exposed, trying to pump in the back of a Humvee. You know, and the way that I felt at the time was it didn't matter that I could do 28 strict pull-ups, that I could run 14-minute 2-mile run times, that I'm level 3 combatives. None of those things mattered. The minute I were to have been seen by a subordinate, in my mind, all credibility and legitimacy would have been lost. Everything that I've, you know, spent my entire career trying to build, just, it would have taken that one time and it would have been lost. And maybe I'm being a little overly dramatic, but that was a real fear of mine at the time. So I just, the amount of anxiousness and stress, and the next thing I knew, my milk supply dramatically decreased. It was almost next to nothing. And I was in the field, so I was pumping and dumping anyways, but that was not the point. The point was I set out another goal to breastfeed for 12 months. It was with my second son. I thought I was better equipped to do it. So the next thing I did, so we came out of that field problem, and it was awful trying to just manage everything. You know, could you just imagine in the middle of a live fire that's like, oh, time out, guys, I gotta go, you know? No, it just wasn't feasible. So again, I wasn't on my own schedule. So I came back from that field problem. I was just distraught. I thought, okay, something needs to change. Something needs to happen. My mom was staying with me at the time. She was just kind of helping us because my husband was still in. So he redeployed by now. He was home, but he was working in ACRC unit, and they're in field. Like, we were basically high-fiving, you know, on the way out to field problems, and we barely saw each other even when we lived together. So my mom was there to help us. And so I just had this idea. Well, first, my idea was, I had this very simple idea, and I went online like anybody would have. You know, Amazon has everything. Just ask, they have it. And I just started searching. I searched Amazon, Google, you name it. I looked everywhere. And to my dismay, I couldn't find what I was looking for. Everything out there, one, it would have required an additional layer. And so it was already too hot for that. I didn't want to put on more layers and then potentially become a heat casualty. Again, as a leader, you're not supposed to be a liability. And then the other things that were out there, they weren't for military purposes. And so I just thought, this isn't good. So I had the idea in my mind. My mom, being a seamstress, I gave her one of my military tops, my t-shirts, and I said, Mom, can you please just make zippers on this? Just throw on zippers right down the middle on the seam. Could you do it? And the first one was not pretty, but she did it. And by God, it was functional. I went into the next field problem and it worked, and it worked great. And then the second time out, and I was like, you know what, Mom, this was great, but could you maybe do it this way? And so anyways, as I was sitting there systematically re-engineering the zipper design to the t-shirt, next thing you know, I have what is now the patent pending design for my company, all because of the journey and with everyone's help. And so I am happy to say I also got to breastfeed my second son for 12 months.
Wow. Nargis, that's an amazing story.
Thank you.
That's incredible. And I've got about, 103 questions that I want to ask you based on that whole journey. Because here's what I found is an entrepreneur's journey starts in childhood, in my opinion, right? The foundations were laid for you to be an entrepreneur when you were, literally 4, 5, 6 years old. And then, obviously when your father passed, and again, I'm so sorry to hear that. And just what you had to go through with that whole journey. And so now you've got your squad of 7, right? Your mom and the 6 kids, and you guys are, you got to survive, right? You guys you're all pitching in. At 6 years old, you're pitching in, and 8 years old, you're starting to babysit. And like, you develop that mindset that it's not if we're going to make it, it's how we're going to make it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. That's the entrepreneur mindset. It's not if this is going to work, it's how do we make it work? And then also the other dynamic that I feel you learned early on as a child was the responsibility and the pressure of feeling ownership of, like, I have to contribute, right? So again, as a little kid, as a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, like, okay, man, these are our resources. We got this, our family here that we've got. And like, I have to contribute. I have ownership in, I've got skin in the game. And I think that feeling, and I want to reference a comment that you made before we went live that I think is so powerful. You've learned more as an entrepreneur than you did with your MBA. And I have said that 1,000 times since I've, been a part of 10 different startups, that there's nothing like it's great to learn it in a nice protected environment, and you got your professor, and okay, here's the spreadsheets and all this kind of stuff, but you haven't felt the pressure and the ownership of like, look, it's on you. You have to make this work, and there's just nothing like it. And then to your journey all the way through hard work and education, love that. But also how in so many different entrepreneur stories, it's there's a pain, right? There's a need or a pain, and like, okay, I love it. You Amazon, Google, like, man, seriously, like, this doesn't exist yet. And how you took, again, throughout your whole life, it's been ownership, this ownership theme, like, okay, so it doesn't exist, rather than like, okay, well, I guess I'm doomed to not be able to breastfeed ever. No, like, I'm going to figure this out.
Not an option. Failure is not an option. Because it never was. As a child, if I didn't get straight A's, or if I wasn't perfecting my basketball skills, that was at a cost of a potential scholarship, and so failure was not an option. Never has been.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that security blanket underneath us growing up.
Right.
And so and then, with Army leadership, right? The Army teaches us to think outside of the box, to create solutions where there are none. And so much of it I owe to Army leadership. There's so much where, throughout my journey as an entrepreneur, I can honestly sit here and say it's made me a better Army leader. There are just, there are so many things that overlap in my mind. There's, we have small teams, we're facing big problems, we're committed to the outcome. We have high stakes. We are sometimes operating in uncertain environments. Small business owners, and I'm sure you feel this too, kind of like when we're in combat, we're facing the enemy. In our case, the enemy is being big corporate businesses with better resource, better knowledge, better equipment. And so just navigating all of those things as an entrepreneur has just really helped me hone in on my Army leadership characteristics as well.
Sure. There's no doubt about it. I love that. And, another thought, in terms of the whole thinking out of the box dynamic, one thing, so when our daughter was 4, and so we, one of the things I told you before is we homeschool. We use a program called Classical Conversations. And one of the reasons that we chose to homeschool is because we want to teach our kid how to be an entrepreneur. We've been entrepreneurs for 20 some years. We have been a part of 10 plus startups, and we love the entrepreneur life. We just love it. Right. And I've always said, hey, if she wants to grow up and get a job for the rest of her life, that's fine. But I at least want her to have a mental file for entrepreneurship and the freedom that can come with being an entrepreneur. And when she was 4 years old, she would start to come up and she started to ask questions, Papi, how do I do this? Papi, how do I do that? And I'm like amor, it's love in Spanish. I'm half Spanish, so I speak to her in Spanish a lot. And one of the things I say is like amor, like entrepreneurs. And then I would say entrepreneurs, and I would make her say, figure it out. Right? She used to hate it. I'd say,
I love that.
Papi, how do I tie my shoes? I'm like, amor, entrepreneurs, figure it out. I'm like, yeah, figure it out.
I love that. I
right?
love that.
Yeah. And so since she was 4, that's what, we've been saying that, like, hey, figure it out. Think for yourself. Learn to think for yourself,
I love that you have the buzzword entrepreneur. I'm going to take that, obviously, with my 3 and my 5-year-old boys now. What I tell them is, can you solve the problem? And, they somehow figure it out. Maybe it's not, it's not that direct A to B, but like, by God, they're going to get there. And so that's what I tell them is like, can you solve the problem? But I love that you kind of say entrepreneur first, because that's.
Yes. And the other dynamic that we've done in our family is we, as also, and I love, again, kind of how you shared your journey there. The other dynamic as an entrepreneur, so that's different than the American education system, right? In the American education system, we have been taught for, at least from K through 12th grade, 14,400 hours, that failure is a bad thing. We're programmed, right?
Right.
Because that fits the employee narrative, right? And the employee narrative is failing is bad as an employee in most environments, right? But as an entrepreneur, like, that's my professor, right? My professor is failure, right? And so in our house, we celebrate failure. And I've asked my daughter for years now, that was one of our bedtime ops is when we have our bedtime ops and operations for civilians, everything is an op to a military guy. And so so during our bedtime ops, I'd ask her, Lena, Amor, how have you failed today? And if she couldn't give me an answer, all right, let's get out of bed. Let's go fail. Let's go do something and fail at it. Right. So I want to reprogram her brain that, and again, another reason why we homeschool, I want to format failure in her brain as like a learning tool, not as like, oh my goodness, this is
not shame or embarrassment. Yeah. Just get up and do it again. And, my 5-year-old, he's really taken to sports. So he's kind of a lot like me with that. And he gets so frustrated if he can't, and I put him in many different sports, like to include gymnastics. And so I just want him to have that body awareness. And, so if he can't do that perfect cartwheel, and I'm like, Caleb, I was like, it doesn't matter how many times you fall. It just matters how many times you get up. And so it's so important to teach our kids that. And as you mentioned, like, failure is not a bad thing. In fact, it's only bad if you fail and then you stay there. No, failure is when one door closes, another one opens. You have a new approach. You do something different. And it's because of that I've really been able to get with my business to where I am today with it.
That's exactly right. And I think that's a critical mindset, a critical aspect of the mindset of a successful entrepreneur is you have to have a healthy version, a healthy definition and perspective of failure, which I feel is also a part of emotional intelligence, right? It takes awareness and stuff. Let me ask you this. So, let me make one other comment about the failure piece. One of the dynamic that's really helped me out with my EQ, with my emotional intelligence, which feeds in obviously directly to being an entrepreneur is jujitsu, right? And one thing that you didn't say is you are some ninja national judo champion.
Oh, yes.
Right?
I was the judo national champion in 2010, both novice and advanced. I also forgot to mention that I was a semi-finalist in Golden Gloves boxing. That was before the West Point team had a women's boxing team, which I tried to create when I was there, but was unsuccessful. And I loved it. I loved the art of fighting, whether that's martial arts or a combination. And so I pursued combatives in the Army. And so I'm also level 3 certified.
Amazing. So again, I use this analogy all the time with folks that I coach and mentor in business. I tell them entrepreneurship is just like being a fighter. It's just like being, I said, the greatest fight, I'm a UFC junkie, mixed martial arts junkie. I do jujitsu. I don't do MMA, but one of the things I say to young entrepreneurs, I'm like, look, entrepreneurship is just like a UFC fighter. So whoever you think the greatest UFC fighter is right on the planet, they still get punched in the face. Or Muhammad Ali, greatest boxer, right? Still got punched in the face. Mike Tyson still got punched in the face, right? Yes. That if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to realize that getting, punched in the face is part of the journey, right? That's part of the job description of an entrepreneur is getting punched in the face. And so don't be surprised. Don't be shocked. Just realize that's part of the deal. And that's why I love jujitsu, because jujitsu, you have to be comfortable in uncomfortable positions. A guy yesterday had me in a real tight guillotine, and fortunately I was able to wiggle out of it, but it was very, being a pretty inexperienced blue belt, I'm still getting balled up by men, women, and children, right? So I still get balled up, but you have to stay calm. And as an entrepreneur, you can't freak out, right? You have to have that emotional awareness and okay, what's going on? Assess the situation, right? And I tell Elena, my daughter, rule number one, you got to stay calm, because as soon as you allow your adrenaline to pump, it automatically switches you into fight or flight.
Yes.
Which now it actually physiologically dumbs you down.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? You lose your ability to think rationally and logically the more your adrenaline is pumping. Now, maybe in a fight that's fine, but I would even argue, like again in jiu-jitsu, I want to stay calm so I can think through all my different options that I have versus, oh my goodness, the guy's about to tap me, I'm going to freak out right now. That's going to be ineffective, right? So again, total correlation to entrepreneurship. How have you handled the emotional ups and downs of being an entrepreneur?
Oh man, that's a great question. I mean, I think I went through all stages of grief. No, it's a lot, because at one point in time, you're so excited, you're ready to get your idea out there and launched. And then at the same time, you're like, oh wait, what if people don't like it? So you have this constant chatter in the back of your mind. It's that little voice. And sometimes you just got to tell that voice to be quiet and block it out. I will say I've had to really hone in on meditating and yoga since I've been an entrepreneur. And not even before I was an entrepreneur, it's just things but I really had to find myself to focus on those two practices more, just because with being an entrepreneur, the risks are high, and there's always, the mind, the little voice in the back of the mind, it's always saying, so far I've bootstrapped my company. I am debt free. I've bootstrapped everything. And then in the back of my mind, there's that voice that's like, what are you doing? That's money. That money could go towards saving. That money could go towards something else. And it's obviously it's not all about the money, but that is a risk, especially when you have a family. And it's much harder to take some of those risks when you have a family. You're a little bit more hesitant. But just all the emotional ups and downs, just the times of just sheer happiness. I pitched my idea at the Aggie Pitch competition, and out of 65 applicants, I placed second. So there's like the times where you're on top of the world. And then there are other times where, like my current investment campaign, for example, where I've gotten so much support and no one has looked at me and said, oh, this is, not a good idea. In fact, people have said quite the opposite. They say, hey, this is solving real world problems. This is very pertinent to today's culture. And yet I didn't raise the capital that I was aiming for on my investment campaign either. And so, yeah, I could feel sorry for myself, and maybe I did a little bit, but then I need to, recock and look at it differently. Maybe that just didn't have my target market. Maybe that didn't have the investors that saw my vision and saw the company's mission. And if it didn't align with them, then maybe there's someone else where it will align with. And so I wish I could say I was always this even keel with the emotions, but it's a constant up and down. And so for anyone that's out there doing high risk or just, or uncertain, find something that works for you. For me, that's meditation and yoga. Have that outlet, have that release because you need it. And it helps you really cope with the ups and downs.
That's great. That's great. That's great advice. My meditation and yoga is jujitsu. So, but you're absolutely right. I think it's critical to have some sort of outlet, because the other dynamic that is so prevalent with entrepreneurs is that many times we get it becomes all consuming, right? It's 24/7. It's all consuming, and I've done this too. I've done the whole tracer burnout, right? The whole crash and burn, where I had no self-awareness, I had no emotional intelligence, and my emotions went with the wind. I mean, I was up, I was down, I was up, I was down, and again, that is not conducive to being an effective entrepreneur, in my opinion, because that's brutal, and not to mention the health risks of stress and anxiety. And so the more that you can, the more awareness, the more emotional awareness that you can have, the more others awareness that you can have, the more, and then the other part of emotional intelligence, the more self-management that you can do, like the meditation and the yoga. But the other thing that you do as well that you mentioned is when you were feeling, I call it dumpy diapers, right? When you were feeling kind of sorry for yourself, right? Which again, I probably have that once a day, probably.
You're right.
Is you asked yourself some questions, and the act of you asking yourself some questions, some logical questions. Well, is there another way to think about this challenge? Could I have explained it differently? Could it be that this particular, venture capitalists just may not share the same visions that I, right? Just the act of asking yourself those questions, that takes self-awareness and is also, I feel, very helpful in growing your emotional intelligence, and also helping people, entrepreneurs, get out of that downward emotional spiral that we can get in, right? Where we can get, and I've done this recently too, a month and a half ago, completely allowed myself to get emotionally hijacked, which is like being emotionally paralyzed, like having an emotional Charlie horse, and not able to move. And which is also a negative as an entrepreneur, because as an entrepreneur, I mean, it's all about progress. Do you have a set of questions that you ask yourself after each, whether it's after each engagement, or do you have a set of questions that you ask yourself on a regular basis?
I wouldn't say it's a set of questions, but it's definitely, again, depending on the scenario. I'm always open to approaching, the business in a different way. And, you mentioned something there where, you're talking about that downward spiral, and like, it's so important to not stay there. As an entrepreneur, you can't afford to stay there. And I think just being an entrepreneur, that our characteristics, I think, oftentimes drives us out of there. It's okay. And that's the thing I want to talk about with emotions. It's okay to feel all the emotions. In fact, don't suppress it. Note it, feel it, acknowledge it for what it is, okay? But you don't have to dwell on it. So it's that dwelling that could be the dangerous part of it. And trust me, there have been times where I've caught myself in a dwelling spiral, and I thought, nope, I got to get out of it. And so I guess, going back to your question, are there a set of questions? I guess I constantly ask, what can I do better? How can I be better? And sometimes I'll ask it openly, to customers, to, just mentors. And I'm just always looking for ways to improve. The goal is just get better every day. Even if it's one small thing in this area, maybe I get better at financials today. Maybe I get better at social media or marketing, or just in chunks. If you take it in all at once, it can be extremely overwhelming. It's almost debilitating. And then I had a very bad habit of staying up at night, and the mind does not shut off. And so to kind of get away from that, I also try to do kind of like a nighttime yoga as well, because I was losing sleep, even though I thought I was being productive by thinking things through, taking notes on my phone and whatnot, and things that I could action later. It really came at a detriment of my sleep. And so get sleep and work out.
No, that's a huge point, Nargis. Physical health absolutely correlates to emotional health, 100%. It definitely impacts physiology. There's no doubt about it. And it is interesting that you made that point, because as a young entrepreneur, I can't tell you how many sleepless nights I had, brainstorming or working or whatever. And there's no doubt that negatively impacts performance, right? I mean, there's a zillion studies on that, it's definitely healthy to get, whatever amount of rest. And then also, again, I feel like, because there's also a phase of my entrepreneurship where I completely let my fitness go completely. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. Well,
Make
yes, that's
yeah.
exactly right. Okay, let me ask you this. How have you, what has been one of the hardest aspects of your emotional journey? I mean, what's been one of the hardest emotional valleys that you've experienced in your entrepreneur journey, and how did you overcome that?
I think one of the hardest ones was comparing myself to other people's businesses. Just kind of that right? It's like keeping up with the Joneses, but on an entrepreneurial side. And, and the negative thoughts that went with that were, just the list could go on with the negative thoughts. And maybe jealousy was also an emotion that I would feel, inadequate. It just, so all those icky feelings that I wanted to get away with. And so if I'm not careful, I can still start comparing myself to other like businesses. And when I say businesses, I'm not comparing myself to an established Fortune 500. I'm comparing myself to other startup retailers. And so the good way to look at that is just saying, okay, well, sometimes they don't have the same product as you. They are perhaps in a different stage as you. You don't know their finances because no one's openly given me their business plan so these are all things that I assume. And then, just stopping yourself from that thought process and bringing it back on you and saying, well, what can I do to be better? And again, that's much easier said, but when you're, maybe you're opening up Facebook and then you go to their page, or you see that, your page has so many likes and then they have like 3 times the amount of likes. And then you're like, oh man, I'm not as popular. It's definitely like that. It's that competitive nature in me that I've always had, especially as an athlete, as, Army officer. So I really got to I have to be graceful with myself and with the business, and just know that things take time. Okay. And yes, everybody wants to be that unicorn out there, but just slow it down, focus on what you're doing, do it well, and it will grow. You will succeed.
Yeah. I love that. You said one thing that was really powerful, is that I think it's important for entrepreneurs to take the time to emotionally smell the roses. Because if not, the consequences are significant if you don't. And again, I'm a poster child for that. So allow yourself to feel the feels, right? Allow yourself to do that. Allow yourself to feel, man, rejected or disappointed or frustrated or angry or inadequate or incompetent. Allow yourself to feel that stuff. And I always recommend journaling, writing it down, taking 5 minutes. Okay, let me just feel how I'm feeling right now, being more emotionally aware. And just that act helps increase the emotional intelligence. Because the other dynamic too is that that the reality is our emotional state impacts how we view everything, up to and including our decision-making process.
Yes.
So if we make right, it's the whole thing, right? Never go shopping when you're hungry, right?
Yes.
Same concept never make big decisions when you're emotional, right? Because you're viewing the problem set from a not necessarily a stable platform. And so again, another reason to grow our emotional intelligence. The other thing that you haven't mentioned that has been great about you, Nargis, is that, and I think it's also a part, it's definitely a part of emotional intelligence, is social awareness, and then social or relationship management, which you have done a great job of. You've also noticed a need that I feel you've needed throughout your entrepreneur journey, and you started a Facebook group of other entrepreneurs. So you are building your own support network, which is also huge as an entrepreneur, which can also be a tendency, right, to be the Lone Ranger, so to speak. But man, for me, I need a support network. I need a group of like-minded Nargises that, hey girl, tell me I'm not alone. Oh no, I've been through the same thing. Well, how did you, right? Just that iron sharpening, which I want to applaud you. What made you come up with that idea to come up with your own, hey, let me put together this Facebook group?
So I knew I had a network, and so my alma mater being West Point, I knew there were a lot of successful people out there. And a part of me, you know, especially with my time management piece of it, is you could work smarter. It's okay to work smarter. You don't have to work harder. And that's hard for me because I've always just worked hard. And there's a point where I kind of had to switch that MO and think, okay, no, I need to work smarter. I mean, still work hard, obviously, but work smarter. And I think a part of that is also just like any leader, raise your hand and say, it's okay to say, I don't know. And there is a lot. There was so much when I first started that I just did not know, and still is a lot that I just do not know. And so I created that group thinking, well, we could just kind of be our own little mastermind. We could ask, and there's people there that have been in business for, 2+ decades and have annual revenues of close to $1 billion. And then there's people like me who just started, just fresh out of the gate. And there's something to be said for each entrepreneur and each of their stages, where right now I am a little bit, I could probably just rattle off and be a little bit of a subject matter expert on IPs, patents, trademarks, registrations, and creating your LLC. Why? Because I just went through it. I just did it. Whereas someone who did it 10 or 20 years ago, maybe it's not as fresh in the back of their mind. And so the other thing is everybody has something to contribute. I am extremely selective as to who I allow in that group. And the reason being is I have basic questions up front. And if people just don't take that simple time to answer the 3 simple questions up front, guess what? Declined. And it's just because that speaks volumes. Like, hey, you want to be an entrepreneur, but you can't answer 3 questions? No. And so I like to make it a think tank. I like to also make it motivational. I also, I try to stay away from the cynicism or the sarcastic things. I love it that people can get in there and promote. Self-promoting gets to be a little crazy, so I don't really allow that, although I do give opportunities to self-promote. But it's a way that we can all bring our services and products together to help each other, bring our knowledge together and help each other. And I want to make it a sound kind of mentor-mentee environment, all the while helping each other succeed.
Love it. Love it. That's awesome. Okay. So final thoughts here, Nargis. So as an entrepreneur, any advice to other folks out there, other entrepreneurs out there, on how to deal with the emotional journey, the emotional ups and downs that is part of the entrepreneur journey. There's no entrepreneur that has just straight rainbows and unicorns, right? That doesn't exist. So what advice would you share or give to help entrepreneurs face that aspect of running and owning a business?
Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I would say be true to yourself. Be true to who you are. Think back of your why. why did you start the company? What is your mission? What are your values? And be true to it. So many times you see people starting a company and it's, X widget. And next thing you know, they're selling N95 masks. For what? To make $10,000 or $20,000 off the sign, just off a sale. And just know who you are, know what you want to be, and stay true to it. It might be very tempting to follow the crowd, and it might be very tempting to, have someone promote your product. But if it's not someone that you personally align with, or if you don't have shared visions, and at what cost? And I think as long as you can stay true to yourself, go back to your why, I think you can do it. I think you can overcome it.
Love it. Okay, so how do we follow you, Nargis? How do we find your business? How do we follow you?
Yeah. So my Facebook handle is just Zanba Zan. Instagram is, which I need to explain. Zanba Zan is my native language Dari, which means woman to woman. And so I was thinking for mothers, by mothers. I was going through all these things, and then so a lot of it came down to the web domain. And so it was unique. It was close to who I am as a person. And so that's the name, Zanba Zan. Instagram is zanbazan _W, the number 2 W. So think woman to woman. So W2W. And then on Pinterest, I'm also Zanba Zan. You can find us at zanbazan.com. And thank you very much for having me. I love what you're doing, and I love how you can get this group of entrepreneurs together and talk about feelings. I have that song in the back of my mind, Black Eyed Peas. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely, Nargis. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, for sharing your story. So excited to be following your entrepreneur growth path, and I'm so excited. It's just, I think that just even talking to you and hearing your story, you've got, I know you're going to be successful, right? I know you're going to make it happen. I know you're going to figure it out. And I'm just excited to be one of the spectators, kind of have a front row seat in your journey. And again, thank you for sharing to our EQ for Entrepreneurs audience, and really excited to know that I know you're going to inspire and impact a lot of people in the process. So thank you so much, Nargis.
Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it.